Welcome everybody. Let's set the scene. So spear phishing in 2021. We're going to give you some research. That's how we're going to open up, and we're going to look at what is going on with spear phishing in this last year and what you can expect to maybe come up in the most immediate period. So a bit of research. We're going to look at what it is, who it's targeting, why people are being targeted, some of the consequences of that. Then we'll move into defense. What can you do about it? What should you do about it? And we have a great panel to be able to talk about that. We'll talk about some of the wider issues around spear phishing, some of the other things that are going on as well. And we'll look at some real world examples. So we have a lot going on. We're going to be doing some polls as we go through. So the polls will come up, we'll ask some questions, and we'll see what you, our participants today, what's going on in your world, and we'll have some relevant polls to the questions as we go. I will introduce the panel now. So first of all, we have Amelia Dunton, who's the Customer Success Manager at Tessian, waving away and smiling away there in the background. Amelia is responsible for managing relationships with customers in the legal sector, having spent 4 years working in information security across a number of functions. Amelia now specializes in supporting clients to protect their employees and drive value from cutting edge tech. Specifically, Amelia assists law firms defend themselves against ever-evolving cyber challenges and aids clients in minimizing accidental data loss, data exfiltration, and spear phishing risk on email. So welcome, Amelia. We're going to hear a lot from Amelia in a few minutes. Next, Stuart Peck, the Director of Cybersecurity Strategy from Zero Day Lab Limited. Welcome, Stuart. Stuart's over 13 years experience in the information security industry, including delivering threat intelligence, social engineering, and incident response projects. He's also an expert on the dark web. You bad person, Stuart. No, it's a good thing. Dark web and open source intelligence, and regularly is asked to deliver talks on the latest attacker trends facing organizations today, which is why it's great to have him with us. Stuart heads up cybersecurity strategy at Zero Day Lab and runs the situational threat awareness program for executives and general employees. He's personally delivered threat briefings to many FTSE 100 and FTSE 250 board execs and directors throughout the UK, Europe, and the US. We have Simon Lamb with us today, who's you get the best award, Simon, for the most excitable wave so far. Simon is the head of IT security at Mishcon de Reya LLP. It's a global law firm. Simon was previously European CISO for Compass Group PLC and head of IT security for Royal Mail, ESISO for EDF Energy, and group head of IT security for Dyson. So a huge amount of experience in multi-sectors and now with a key law firm. Simon's passionate about taking a pragmatic, risk-based approach to IT security, which allows InfoSec to enable a business to be successful. So welcome, Simon. Good to see you. And last but by no means least, Mohammed Mo Bakir, who's the Chief Technology Officer at CTS. As our CTO, Mo's responsible for the overall technology strategy at CTS, driving development of services and solutions. With 16 years IT experience, he works with our clients to provide advice and guidance, aligning the right tech with tangible business outcomes. His role involves managing and scaling the technical teams to continuously enhance the quality of solutions and service delivery with an ultimate focus on our clients. My name is David Vazakli. I'm the CIO, in-house legal CIO at CTS. I've worked mainly in law firms. I've been here for just over a year. I've been at Eversheds, been at NW Solicitors and others as a CIO. And I've had my own experiences with a number of cyber incidents over the years to deal with inside of law firms. But my role today is as the chair facilitator of this session to drive us through. We're going to get into the detail now. That's who we are. That's why we're here. That's our experience. We're going to share that now with you. What I want to say is please use not so much the chat feature, but the Q&A function that we've got going. So if you want to open the Q&A icon, which is at the bottom of the screen, so you have that, don't wait till the end of this session to pose your questions. What I want is this session to be as interactive with our attendees, we've got 19 now, as possible. So as we go through the presentations and talk through some questions and polling, please start, if it triggers some thoughts, please start putting your thoughts, even if it's just a comment, a supporting comment, or a question to our panel. Throw it open into the session there. As we go through the session, I will bring in the questions at the relevant points, but I want it to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free to start as soon as we get into the session. So today we're going to open with a small presentation from Amelia, who's going to talk about some market research and what's going on with spear phishing from the viewpoint of Tessian, and then Stuart will support that with some wider elements in the market as well. But for now, Amelia, over to you.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks for the introduction. We'll just share my screen for everyone. Can everybody see this okay? Perfect. So yeah, thank you so much. Really great to be here speaking with everyone today amongst this great panel as well. I'm Amelia. I'm a customer success manager for the legal vertical at Tessian. And today I'm going to focus on the rising threat of spear phishing attacks for law firms and explain how Tessian helps law firms in particular to protect themselves from the most advanced threats. So what this is all based on today is a piece of research that Tessian conducted. So we looked at a report that we recently conducted, a report that looked at 2 million malicious emails to understand the impact across multiple industries. But law firms and the legal sector really did stand out in particular. Though these were based on 2 million malicious emails that Tessian Defender, our inbound module, detected, all of which had already bypassed legacy inbound technologies such as secure email gateways, but also Office 365 protections as well. To sort of set the scene of what we're facing today in 2021, soon coming into 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, it was revealed that threat actors were targeting IKEA employees with stolen email reply chains. They were inserting themselves into legitimate chains with malicious links and attachments. So today I'll be explaining why law firms need new methods to combat new tricks and why Tessian is looking at threat signals that other tools do not. So who is Tessian? Tessian is on a mission to secure the human layer by empowering people to do their best work without security getting in the way. So we actually prevent human error and cover a lot of email risks, such as accidental data loss, first of all. So that will be sending an email to the wrong person. Data exfiltration, so sending sensitive information to an unauthorized or rather personal account. So DLP on that side as well, but also spear phishing attacks, which I'm going to be focusing on today. We are so proud and grateful to be working with all of our legal customers. I couldn't get everybody on the slide today, but we certainly wouldn't be where we are today without their continued support. So legal is certainly a sector that's really, really close to us at Tessian. The legal sector has always been a fruitful hunting ground for cyber criminals. It's logical. Law firms, by their nature, are aggregators of some of the most sensitive data for their clients. By infiltrating a law firm, attackers have access to a huge breadth of sensitive information from many different companies. And because the size of the prize is so high, attackers are no longer just launching speculative spray and pray attacks that are caught by predefined controls. Instead, attackers are putting lots of effort into creating highly curated, targeted attacks designed specifically to evade existing defenses and trick lawyers. And there's evidence to support this. We recently conducted a report on the spear phishing landscape in 2021 that looked at 2 million malicious emails to understand the impact across these industries. The legal industry was very heavily targeted. So to put that into context, a 500-user law firm saw 6,500 highly targeted emails get through existing controls each year, such as the secure email gateway and Office 365 as mentioned. And putting that into, I guess, a more tangible metric, that's 13 emails per employees per year. And that's a lot of risk to rely on lawyers to spot. One of the most advanced and emergent attacks that we're seeing is account takeovers, also known as compromised accounts. Spear phishing historically has been about impersonation, creating illegitimate fake accounts to impersonate legitimate people or services. So a managing partner, a finance director, impersonating something like Microsoft as well. Account takeover events go a few steps further. So attackers start by harvesting login credentials so that they can gain access to legitimate accounts. They use their access to the legitimate account to monitor traffic and time an attack that maximizes the chances of success. We actually found in our report that the majority of malicious emails were being sent in business hours between the hours of 2 till 6 p.m. An account takeover attack email can be sent even when the legitimate person is corresponding with your fee earner as well. So they can be mixed in between normal working hours. Detecting this kind of attack is vitally important for our legal customers. And law firms specifically are being targeted in two ways. Firstly, themselves. So 31% of account takeover attacks belong to legal and professional services addresses. Secondly, through their counterparties. Attackers are going after law firms' counterparties such as their customers, first of all, barristers' chambers, and also suppliers as well, trying to find a weak entry point that looks to be someone who you can absolutely trust, but in fact, it's not the legitimate sender. Because of the nature of account takeovers being from real verified accounts, often external parties that law firms have previously engaged email correspondence with, so seem to be trusted. You could have even spent email correspondence, hundreds of times over the course of the year with that particular email address. This means that account takeovers are incredibly hard to spot and therefore difficult to defend against. Previous approaches to stopping these kinds of threats are falling short. Technologies such as secure email gateways or Microsoft built-in controls are focused on identifying known threats by looking for known bad in an email or sender. But as these emails come from legitimate sources, they sail through existing checks, including all email authentication checks. Training is always a very important piece of the puzzle, but when it comes to spotting compromised accounts, there are so few warning signals for lawyers to spot. And as we know, fee earners are incredibly busy during the day. It certainly isn't reasonable to train every employee to spot when an email is from a legitimate source and it's in fact being sent from an attacker. It would likely require hours of investigation per email, a very daunting prospect when lawyers charge in 6-minute increments. And so that's why a new approach is needed. At Tessian, we leverage behavioral intelligence to analyze historical sending behavior and patterns, and then spot automatically for employees when something looks unusual. That means we can see when an email is coming from a different IP address, if there's just even a subtle change in the tone of language, or if an email is not matching up with traffic elsewhere in your firm. This allows us to flag advanced risks that other solutions are missing, surfacing relevant information to your users within the moment and allowing your lawyers to focus on what they're best at, focusing on their jobs. If anybody has any questions on the report, please feel free to reach out to me and I'm very happy to send it over to you as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amelia. And I'm going to come back to you with some questions on that as we go, but I'd like to carry on that story. I'm going to come to Stuart Peck now. Stuart, you do an awful lot of research in your area as well, not just on spear phishing, but some of the other sort of threats that are going on. Can you maybe just comment on what you've just heard from Amelia and then just expand on that if you can, please?
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that Amelia said, actually. If you look at supply chain attacks in particular and account takeovers, that it's incredibly common. And some of the things that we see, compromised accounts are, if you look at the amount of compromised data that exists out there on just user accounts and things like this, it's in excess of like 15 billion records, right? So there's a massive data lake of relevant and potentially easy to gather credentials. And of course, then you also have things like Trojans that are constantly scraping credentials all the time. So account takeovers are really, really important for attackers to look legitimate. Coming through the supply chain as well, or coming through a trusted third party, increases that legitimacy and increases the likelihood of a phishing attack working. For me, spear phishing is that initial point of entry for an organization. So delivering that spear phishing attack is usually the point to get in, remain undetected for a large period of time, and then a lot of stuff happens off the back end of it. So the objective of a spear phishing email is primarily to gain initial access. And then we then start to see the other attacks happen, whether that's ransomware or whether that's data loss or whatever it may be, or even that attack leading to the attacker then jumping to the law firm's customers, for example, because they could potentially be part of that supply chain attack if they're a smaller law firm, for example. So I think I'd agree with most, pretty much everything Amelia said. And like I said, it is incredibly common and becoming even more common as the year has progressed, really.
So Amelia and Stuart, is the threat increasing? Is the trend of spear phishing and targeted attacks getting worse? And we have a lot of barristers' chambers who are also with us today on this call. And the last 12 months has been rough for chambers where barristers particularly are being specifically sort of targeted. And maybe you can talk to that. Stuart, I'll come to you first on that, and then Amelia, I'll come back to you.
I think spear phishing is always going to be amongst the top kind of common attacks, because the cost of delivery of the attack is incredibly low. The likelihood of it working, because it's so relevant, and if you take into consideration, if you want to get really targeted, then the digital footprint analysis you do of your potential targets to get really accurate would be high. If you're coming from a trusted source, you've got all that data to use to get really specific. So I would say with those kind of two things, I'd say it's always going to be high, and probably if people don't have the right controls, such as multi-factor authentication to prevent account takeovers, then it's going to continue to grow.
So Amelia, how are the attackers, manipulating people? What are the tactics that they're using? What can people look out for?
Yeah, so we're seeing obviously quite a wide variety, and also touching on, that question of whether those attacks are increasing. It also depends on the time of year. In that report, we've actually, it shows a graph, and Black Friday, as you can imagine, is an optimum time for targeting people. It tends to dip off a little bit afterwards, and then over Christmas, people assume that there might not be all controls in place. So we do see some heightened targeting there too. In terms of the tactics and techniques that they're deploying, we can see attackers sit in email boxes for quite a long time, understanding what is normal behavior for the people that they are looking to, impersonate through the legitimate email address. Quite a common thing that we're seeing at Tessian, just moving away slightly from account takeovers, is actually zero payload attacks. So the attacker constantly sending emails using different email addresses, slightly tweaking the contents, making it very difficult to detect using a signature-based approach. So being zero payload doesn't have a malicious URL or an attachment, so you can't detect the attack using those signatures as well. And the attacker is often impersonating senior execs in a company, sometimes with quite complex impersonations. So in our case, we get targeted trying to impersonate our CEO, Tim Sadler, but instead they'll write Tim H. Sadler, which means you can't just check to see if their display name matches one of your execs in the first instance. And we also see a lot of people being targeted who, on LinkedIn, if you recently join a company, if you're potentially quite junior, you could be quite an easy target, and particularly in the remote world as well. It's not so easy to go over to someone's desk and say, hi, did you email me this? And you're not fully aware of everyone in the company. So that question of, who is most at risk, it makes it quite difficult for, someone like Simon, to be aware of every single person in the company. You can't really stand over the devices of every single person to see what's going in and out of their email inbox. So what we really want to do is actually surface that to our customers as well.
And Stuart, can you just zero payload, just explain that for our audience a little bit, just a little bit more. What is a zero payload element?
In the terms of how Hamid described it, I'd consider that to be like a social engineering attack, right? Yeah. So we're talking about the human element here. So a good example would be the as we call it, business email compromise scam. So CEO impersonations, previously known as like whaling, where we're talking about someone being impersonated to gain information. There are quite a few examples of zero payload attacks that I've seen recently for malware groups such as Bazzaloader, for example, that there's no malicious attachment, there's no URL you click. It's purely you're sent something to say this has expired, or this service has expired, or you're about to be charged for something. And then off the back of that, you're encouraged to call a call center, and then you're then telephone phished to then go to the malicious website to download a receipt after the end of the phone call, which has the malicious payload, which is a malicious document, and you're encouraged to open that. So there's different mechanisms that can all be applied, but ultimately a zero payload means there's no malicious attachment or no malicious link.
Which is why it gets through, because there's nothing particularly malicious or harmful in that email, but the intent is malicious. What they're trying to get you to do then leads to the malicious element later. But the first thing gets through because there's nothing particularly harmful in it to block.
Right. Yeah. It's abuse of business process, right? Also, all social engineering is about is getting someone to gain some level of trust. So we talk about credibility, right? So if it's coming from a trusted source, then the credibility is there, and then it's about establishing some form of trust or some form of relationship based on some determined circumstances. I already know this person, I've been speaking to this person, so why would I assume that's malicious? Or it's a company I use, so what if they're sending me asking me for some information, they probably would have asked me for that anyway. So it's trying to fit into those kind of degrees of normality where you might be pushing that a little bit, but it's still within expected realms. And that's why social engineering always works when we're dealing with humans. Obviously technology can help, but the human side, it can be very highly effective.
So we're going to start talking about real examples with law firms. I'll come to Simon in a moment. We're going to do a poll. Can I just thank you for the two questions so far? I will be coming to them, so keep them coming in, please, and we'll have plenty of time to sort of get to those. But we're going to take our first poll of the 18 attendees that we have. So, and that poll question is this: how confident are you that your users are informed enough about cybersecurity and vigilant in preventing the type of attacks that we're talking about today? So it'd be just interesting now, just to take 30 seconds, if you could just, we're not allowed to vote, so you can just click where you feel your confidence level is at the moment. And we'll see what that result comes in a few seconds' time. I'm just trusting that you're all clicking away in the background now. We'll close it in 10 seconds and we'll see what the result comes up with. Beth, who's in the background, feel free in about 5 seconds' time to close that off, and let's see what that says. So we're all looking at this together now for the first time. So there's a good slug of people who feel quite, no one at the very confident, but some people feel quite confident. But then there is a majority collectively who either feel very unconfident, slightly unconfident, or a bit in the middle on it. So thank you. And now I'm wondering, I'll say to our panel, whether, as I come to you, Simon, I wonder whether there's anything on there that surprises you. So my question to you, Simon, to get us going is, how are you keeping ahead of spear phishing at Mishcon the Raya and your approaches? And maybe you'd like to comment on what you can see in that poll result there and how that reflects maybe internally at Mishcon.
Yeah, sure, David. So thank you very much. So I think just to support the sort of message that's coming across during the session today. So we have our own cyber practice within MDR called MDR Cyber, and they produced the threat report for me as part of developing my cyber strategy. And business email compromise was the greatest risk that we felt that we faced as a business here. So that ties in nicely to the theme that's going on today. My strategy around this is based around people, process, and technology. So, end user awareness. So we receive approximately 1 million emails a month inbound into our systems. So it's important that our users are aware of the risk. I recently undertook mandatory training across the whole of the business and said at the end of the training that, you know what, I'm going to be testing you. I'm testing the effectiveness of my training in the next few weeks. Watch out. And the volume of calls going into the help desk, it's saying, I think I've got a suspicious email, went up exponentially during that time. So that's kind of a sign that some of that stuff worked. The second bit around process. So we actively monitor an abuse at mishcon.com mailbox where our colleagues send emails into there that they're not sure about. And we receive, around about 10 of those a week from our colleagues thinking, actually, we're not sure if this is right or not. And then last but definitely not least is technology. So we operate a defense in-depth approach when it comes to message hygiene. However, Tessian does play a key role in analysing our inbound email and reducing the risk of suspicious emails ending up in our colleagues' inboxes. and we see, you know, our colleagues interacting with Tessian on a daily basis, and people know about Tessian when you come to speak to some of our senior colleagues here in the business. Just finally, just on this part, just to share an example. So one of my previous lives, I had a colleague that received an email requesting a payment for an invoice. They didn't really spot the signs of it, so they responded back saying, sorry, I can't pay this because there isn't an invoice attached. 10 minutes later, a specifically crafted invoice arrived in their inbox, and with all the necessary details and targeted specifically for that company. Luckily, somebody else got involved in the process, and we were able to stop anything from actually happening. We did some analysis. The domain was registered in Barbados, and unfortunately, my request to go over and analyse on the ground any suspicious activity was denied.
Yes, that's a pity. That's a pity, Simon. So, Simon, you were just triggering something as a memory for me, because when I was at NW Solicitors, we also moved to Tessian in the last sort of couple of years, whereas we used Mimecast. My view was Mimecast blocks out 95% of what comes through as a rules-based system. But what we're talking about here, about the things that are very targeted, that are designed to get around the rules, it is the human layer. And Tessian was very effective at closing down or reducing what was quite a risk. Yeah. We were about 500,000 emails a month compared to your million, but the volume of it was that 5% was still quite a bit of malicious volume coming through, which is why we had to act.
Yeah, I think expecting one technology tool to be perfect in this space is just unreasonable. And therefore, it's like with firewalls, it's like with any other technology you would put in place, you would operate a defense in depth approach just to make sure, you know, I don't operate the same version of the same vendor of antivirus on my endpoint clients as I do on my servers. So it's just standard defense in depth approach that we should take in this space.
So that, hey, listen, Mo, I'm going to come to you now, just so you've got time to take your mic off there, mute. But that sort of holistic approach to security, unfortunately, there's not one magic pill, is there, Mo, for closing this down. I mean, you've been in the legal sector, Mo, for a number of years now, and your experience of working with all the law firms you do and the barristers' chambers we have now, how well protected are they proportionally in relation to the risks they face? Are they all taking this holistic view of, it's not just one channel, you've got to, unfortunately, you've got to invest and look at a wider range of solutions? What's your thoughts, Mo?
Yeah, thanks, David. So it's at varying degrees, really. So I do agree with a lot of what Simon alluded to earlier around different approaches from his experience and what they're doing at Mishcon. However, generally, the focus on cybersecurity and protection for law firms have significantly increased in the last couple of years, particularly post-COVID. So some of the law firms had their security provisions centered around this perimeter idea, where office-based environments and secured by perimeter and some other solutions. And the transition to home working, remote working, was quite a bit of a challenge for some of the law firms, particularly around security and what that introduces from a decentralized working model, where you have to take a bit more holistic approach around security. In the past, the security practices were mainly focused for some, particularly on the smaller side of law firms, around addressing certifications or compliance, such as cyber essentials, and doing the things that are required to tick the box around that. But there's certainly been a lot more focus and maturity in conversations around cyber threats, protection mechanisms that need to be applied around that. That's an ongoing and at varying levels for different law firms. But as an overall, there has been an increase in maturity around this. Particularly around, as we've been speaking for since the beginning of this session, around email security and adding additional solutions and additional layers of protection around email beyond the traditional and the legacy solutions that were implemented previously.
Okay, I'm going to come to some of the questions that we've got from our attendees. And just on the thing we're just talking about, I'm curious from our attendees whether they face internal challenges in your chambers and in your law firms for budget recognition or a level of budget investment for investing more in security than you do. Do you find that a challenge? Is it more of an open door? Is there an awareness within leadership teams that actually, you know, a holistic view to security management needs to be in place, and that means perhaps investing more. Is that prioritization in your firms, or are you finding it a little bit of a battle to sort of convince? I'd be very curious, maybe not questions as such, but any comments from people that they want to put up. But whilst I leave you with that, let's just go through some of the questions we've had from attendees. So Brian asks, how can we objectively score current cyber threats with active and third-party mail proxies in place? Who would like to have a little stab at that? Stuart.
Okay, yeah, it was going to be me, wasn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's always difficult, right? So this is a difficult question to answer, right? So how can we objectively score current cyber threats with an active third-party mail proxies in place? I think it comes down to a couple of things, right? So if you've got the ability to be able to inspect that traffic and inspect those email headers and be able to understand where they're coming from, the intent, also the language of those emails, and then also what those emails are sending, then you can always have a degree of confidence. Attackers will always try to mask and hide their traffic. So a good example is, right, so if I send my phishing email, which I do quite a lot, right? If I send a phishing email via Microsoft to a Microsoft from Office 365 to a 365 account, it's pretty much will be trusted, right, by Microsoft. So if you're using Microsoft 365 protection, Microsoft can't block Microsoft. It's kind of an unwritten rule, right? So it becomes very hard to kind of protect that. Same with Google as well. If you're sending a malicious email from a Google account to another Google account, it's very hard to block. So it then comes down to be able to trust. You can't block these emails based on where they're coming from alone. You have to be able to then put additional protections in place to identify, as Amelia said, the language, what's coming in. And then also your supply chain as well. So making sure that your supply chain has the appropriate controls in place. This comes back down to what Simon said as well. We've got to push out to our supply chain to make sure they have the appropriate level of control, so they're not exposing us to risk. So we have to do those kind of assessments. So it's a very difficult question to answer, and I don't think I've really answered it, but I've kind of touched on it, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, thanks for having a stab at that, Stuart. Amelia, you probably detected I'm going to come to you next with the Tessian question, but from Paul, who says, to what extent is the Tessian monitoring by human users? How does it work with GDPR? Presumably monitoring information doesn't put anyone at risk of breaching GDPR. It's a very interesting question, one I remember posing 3 years ago to Tessian, but why don't you take us away on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kick off, just on that previous question as well, that's, on those, the way that Tessian is detecting, that's all out of the box with Tessian. We won't just use unusual location as an indicator for anything like that. So with account takeovers, some of the threat indicators that we see are not just unusual location, it's, suspicious language, actually BCCing in a recipient as well. So there's a world of different detections that we can look at. In terms of Tessian monitoring by human users, so by that I think we mean that whether it's somebody at Tessian, I guess, looking at this, or whether it's just sort of in-house. So when you're using Tessian, Tessian does not have access to your emails going outbound, for example. So if you're sending an email to a particular recipient, and for our outbound module, we're saying, is this the correct recipient? That's just a warning that your end user will see and will take on the action. A lot of people who deploy Tessian in the first instance, speaking to some of our customers, I mean, we've been working with law firms since 2017, 2016, just when we were first getting started as a company. The number one GDPR incident that they were all suffering from was sending a misdirected email to the wrong person. So that's why they deployed Tessian in the first instance. So in terms of why people deploy Tessian, that is to protect against GDPR fines. When it comes to the actual information there, we'll be able to use a number of different ways of detecting that. So say, for example, you don't usually talk about this particular project with this recipient, you usually talk about it with this person. So the warnings will always be very contextual, and it's certainly a risk that's very top of mind for our outbound modules.
Thanks, Amelia. Our time has gone very quickly, as I knew it would be. I'm just going to fly through a few things now. There's another question I'm going to bring to Simon. How effective do you think training can be? How long will users remember the content? And does it work for some of the more advanced attacks? Is there another way? How are you dealing with that challenge, Simon?
So I think it goes back to, if you see awareness training as a one-hit wonder, and you do it once a year, you tick a box from a compliance point of view, then it's just not going to be effective after a couple of weeks. So my strategy is very much, I've got a 12-month rolling plan of cyber awareness, variety of tailored activity against specific departments with different threats, etc. And also I'm setting up a cyber awareness steering group. So I'm inviting members of the business in to help me make sure that the content lands correctly, because there's nothing worse than a technical person kind of sending stuff out full of acronyms that nobody understands. And I think it's just making it fun and interactive as well. So the last session I did had videos, it had polls, and the feedback was just A, amazing that they really enjoyed it, and B, the volume of calls and the number of suspicious emails being reported went up exponentially.
Fantastic. I want to get to our next poll question, which I'll do in a second, but maybe we can just carry on, because we have counterparty risk going on at the moment, Simon. There's a lot of risk to barristers' chambers. It's very much the hot topic at the moment. How do you as a firm work with your counterparties and other partners and perhaps chambers in ensuring that they're not providing attackers with a weak point of entry into your own network? So the relationship between law firms and barristers' chambers, very much the hot topic at the moment with regards to end-to-end security. How do you work? How do you guarantee the security of third parties?
Well, I could never guarantee any security of anything, so I'd never use that terminology at all. What we do is we don't allow direct access into our network. So we have a variety of terminal service type environments for people to be able to connect into. So all of our third parties support providers connect in through terminal services. We are actively looking at a variety of information sharing solutions through our DMS as well. And we've got people working in the business on how we educate our colleagues on how to use those in a secure way. To support that, we are also now with the new functionality that Tessian have recently released on their DLP capability, we're actively looking at how we can start to monitor and prevent some information leaving the environment that should not be going via email. Just I guess the word of warning, I've implemented DLP in my last few companies. It can be really, really powerful, but it can also break things very, very quickly.
What's DLP, just for our audience?
Sorry, so data loss prevention. So data loss prevention is a technology that analyzes the contents of the information that's leaving the environment, and then you have specific rules in place to say, yes, that can go, or no, it can't.
That is, and that touches on something that I've seen from our clients who introduce technology to help them be more secure. But one of the things that can happen is it can either sometimes get it wrong or sometimes over egg the discipline, which means legitimate things occasionally get blocked and need to be reviewed.
Absolutely.
And there's always this balance, isn't there, between I need to be more secure because I have to be, we have to reduce the threat, but also the counterbalance of that is sometimes legitimate business can get in the way, and processes are required, agile processes are required to deal with that. Where do you think that balance is? So
I think that's really important, and I think data loss prevention as a project, an implementation project, is quite unique in the fact that it requires significant business engagement to make sure you're not blocking things as well. I can share an example of this from a previous life where, and we went public with it. When I worked at Dyson, I actually found insider activity going on through analysing the information that was leaving the environment, and one of our engineers was selling secrets to one of our competitors. And you can imagine the risk appetite kind of went like that overnight, right? Lock everything down. And then it took a period of time to then relax things down, put additional processes in place, etc. And I think that's the thing with DLP. It's not a one-hit wonder. You just don't fit and forget it, install the CD and off you go. You need the right support and love and care around it to continually make sure it's doing what you want it to do.
So let's take our second poll now to our attendees who predominantly stayed with us. Thank you very much. Do you currently audit your external parties or external third-party partners to ensure that their security measures are up to scratch for you? Is that something that you do? Let's just run that for 15, 20 seconds now. Oh, okay. More than half of our panelists, attendees, did that, and it's pretty split. Now, it's interesting. I happen to know that we have a mix of law firms and barristers' chambers on our session today, and it could be that the law firms are saying yes, we're doing the auditing, and the barristers are saying we are being audited. We're sort of on the receiving end of that. We haven't got time for another poll on that. That would be interesting to see that result as well. But Mo, I'm gonna come to you. One, you can just talk about what we've just seen there, but if we recognize that even with the best security in place, Mo, attacks can still infiltrate systems. So what can people put in place to ensure that the impact of successful attacks is minimized?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So as I'll just rephrase what Simon, re-say what Simon said, which is you can't really guarantee security. It just, that concept doesn't exist. You can take a lot of measures and steps and put systems and processes in place. However, one of the core fundamentals around reducing the impact of attacks or ensuring some level of mitigation is multi-factor authentication. I mean, Stuart alluded to that, but that's a kind of a baseline, a minimum requirement now. The other piece is having eyes and ears if something is to happen, and that's detection capabilities. So that's all about detection and response. And there has been a lot of evolution in detection and response tooling and solutions out there in terms of intelligence, using AI and so on to advance that detection capability. And I'd use that to say that things like endpoint detection, or what we call as EDR, for us, that's a new baseline. So you're kind of stepping away from antivirus being the baseline for endpoint protection and stepping that up to having that detection and response capabilities that allows you to do some automated actions if some malicious activity is happening on endpoints, such as blocking processes, files, etc. So even if something makes its way through phishing or the like, then you have that detection capability to minimize the impact of that issue or breach kind of extending to the wider network. Taking that then into the back end infrastructure, your network perimeter and so on, that's where that managed detection and response or SIEM type solutions, and there's been a lot of advancement in that side of things compared to the capability that existed a few years ago.
Thanks, Mo. We're in our last minutes, but Stuart, I'm gonna come back to you about what attacks are maybe going on with law firms. Do you see many cases where serious attacks on law firms could have been easily prevented? And what should the firms, again, like Mo was saying, what should the firm's response be if it happens? If it gets through and something is going on, what should people do? Maybe you can talk about some examples either in legal or other.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with what law firms should do first, because that's actually probably quite an important point. A lot of times, I think law firms don't have, and not all law firms, because obviously some do, some don't, varying mix, but should have a really solid incident response plan. And I think that's really important to be able to understand, okay, what happens if our worst case scenario happens? So we have the right people lined up not just in the technical teams, but the business side as well, the organization partners that can also make sure they understand what their responsibilities are. Do they call a third party in to then do the post-breach incident analysis or forensics or support? Do they have support there, or do they have that in-house? Because that's the difference. I think Mo alluded to something really quite important. If a phishing email gets in and someone clicks on it and your controls have failed, because at some point a control will fail. You can't always rely on controls. You can have as many controls as you like, but a highly sophisticated attacker who's incredibly determined will probably know at some point what controls you have and will work out ways to bypass those controls through different methods. So you have to assume at some point any control can fail. Any monitoring may not pick this up. Many examples I've seen, especially of the advanced adversaries, they're subverting EDR. We're able, as ethical hackers, to subvert EDR, bypass SOC, sit in an environment for 30 days, not being detected with full domain admin, right? So at the point of detection, that's when you should kick your plan in. The earlier you detect, brilliant, that's fantastic. You can contain things quite quickly and prevent the incident. But as many cases we see, whether it's ransomware or data loss, it's the point of that you detect something, or a user report something, or your tools tell you something's wrong. Having a well orchestrated plan that's been tested through like desktop scenarios, people are educated on it, people have run through this multiple times, reduces that overall impact. Because when from my experience, and I've been in that room with lots of people at very high level breaches, when things get confusing is when mistakes happen. And if you don't practice, you don't keep practicing and keep trying these things out, that is the difference between a breach being managed to it's out in the wild, it's in the news, potentially your attackers have got away with everything.
So what you're saying there reminded me very much of my 3 principle mantra when I was back in a law firm, which was do what you can to stop it getting in. If it gets in, have your stuff in place to try and stop it doing harm. If it does harm, have the ability to recover. And all our technology investments and solution investments were based in those 3 camps. Try and stop it getting in. If it gets in, try and, the EDR pieces, try and stop it doing harm. But if the worst happens, have that ability to recover and sort of rebuild. It was my way of trying to simplify the message for the board and the directors in terms that they could sort of understand, and that's where our investment tranche went. Simon, is that something that you're nodding there? Is that something?
Yeah, no. So my strategy is prevention, detection, recover. Right. I think historically, companies have been scared about the fact that they may have incidents, or they will have incidents. And over my last couple of companies, it's taking them through that journey to say, actually, we will get this, and we need to make sure we're prepared and we can recover correctly, and not to focus all your attention on the prevention, because the detection and recover is equally as important.
Well, our attendees have been generous with their time. We've gone over a few minutes. They're still sticking with us. So thank you very much for that. We're going to draw this to a close now. What I will say to our attendees is please feel free to reach out to Tessian, to CTS, to Zero Day Labs, or even Simon for some advice on what you've heard. Feel free to reach out for us to continue the conversations if you feel that there's areas where you would like to refocus or think you should focus more, or you just want to know more. Please feel free to do that. Thank you very much for attending our webinar today. We look forward to seeing you in future sessions. And I suppose it's appropriate for me to say, be safe. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.